The sharp crack of a gunshot echoed through the hall, followed by a wave of clapping from the crowd. Inside the elite shooters club, men and women dressed in expensive shooting jackets and polished boots gathered around the main range. They weren't here for an ordinary day of practice. They were here to watch Blake Radcliffe, the king of this place, show off once again. Blake stood tall, his custom-made rifle resting easily in his hands. His smile stretched wide as the target came back, another bullseye, right dead center. Cameras flashed, and a few men slapped him on the back like he'd just saved the world. Blake didn't mind the attention. In fact, he expected it. He had grown up rich, trained by the best, and now at 42, he wore success like a second skin. 5-time national champion, Olympic gold medalist, and the face of a luxury gun brand. Blake had it all, and he made sure everyone knew it. The club itself was just as proud of him. Heavy wood walls, crystal chandeliers, leather chairs that smelled like money. This place wasn't built for beginners. It was built for people who lived in a world where winning was normal and losing wasn't even an option. Blake loaded another round, taking his time as if the crowd was lucky just to watch. No one here questioned if he was the best. No one doubted who owned the range today. But everything changed the moment a simple woman stepped through the front door. The heavy glass doors swung open, and for a second, no one even noticed her. Emma Miller stood just inside the entrance, clutching a worn leather purse close to her side. She wore a plain blue cardigan, a pair of jeans that had seen better days, and scuffed sneakers that didn't belong anywhere near the polished floors of the elite shooters club. Around her, people in designer jackets and expensive sunglasses turned briefly to look, then quickly turned away, like she was some mistake that had wandered in by accident. Emma's fingers tightened on the strap of her purse as she made her way to the front desk. The young receptionist behind the counter barely lifted her head. When she finally looked up, her smile froze for a second before she smoothed it over with something fake and practiced. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her voice full of boredom. "I'd like to register for the open practice session," Emma said, quietly but steady. The receptionist's eyes flicked down to Emma's plain shoes, her simple clothes, then back up to her face. "Members only," she said sharply, already turning back to her computer. Emma swallowed, pulling a crinkled envelope from her purse. "I have a day pass. It was a gift." The girl took it without much interest, sighing as if the whole thing was a waste of her time. From across the room, Blake Radcliffe noticed the exchange. He leaned against a leather chair, laughing with a group of men dressed as sharply as him. When he saw Emma standing there, awkward and out of place, a slow, mocking grin spread across his face. "Well, well," Blake said loudly enough for the room to hear. "Looks like someone took a wrong turn on the way to Walmart." Laughter exploded around him, bouncing off the high ceilings. Emma didn't say anything. She just kept her eyes down and made her way toward the basic practice range, her heart pounding hard, but her steps steady. Behind her, Blake and his friends watched, already seeing her as nothing more than a joke. Emma set her purse down at the farthest lane, keeping her head low. She carefully unwrapped a small cloth bundle from inside, revealing a standard Glock 19. It wasn't anything fancy. No gold trim, no custom sights. Just a regular worn-in handgun. The kind that got the job done without showing off. Blake and his friends had drifted closer now, laughing quietly among themselves. To them, this was better than anything on TV. A rich man's version of a comedy show. Blake stepped forward, hands in his pockets, his smile sharp and cruel. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "Are you sure you're in the right place? This isn't a knitting club." The men around him burst out laughing. Emma looked up slowly, meeting Blake's bright blue eyes with a steady, unreadable gaze. "I'm just here to practice," she said, her voice even. Blake chuckled, pretending to wipe a tear from his eye. Then he leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice but making sure everyone around could hear. "I'll make you a deal," he said. $10,000 says you can't hit the bullseye from 50 yards. The room grew a little quieter. A few heads turned, sensing the beginning of something worth watching. Emma paused, her hand brushing lightly over the simple gold ring on her finger. For a second, she seemed to hesitate. Then she nodded once. "I don't have that kind of money," she said. Blake's grin grew wider. "If by some miracle you hit it, I'll pay. If you miss, you leave and never come back. Fair?" Emma's fingers tightened once around the grip of her Glock. She lifted her eyes again, and this time there was a flicker of something deeper there. Something solid, unshakable. "All right," she said quietly. The crowd was paying full attention now. A few people placed quiet side bets. One woman whispered to her husband that it was cruel, but she still stayed to watch. They all expected the same thing, a short, embarrassing show. No one, not even Blake, had the slightest idea what was about to happen. As Emma tightened her grip on the gun, her mind drifted back to a different range, a different time. She could almost hear his voice beside her, calm and steady, the way it always had been when he was teaching her. Nathan Miller wasn't just her husband. He had been a Navy SEAL, one of the best. To the world, he was a ghost, a sniper who could hit targets that others couldn't even see. To Emma, he was just Nathan, the man who brought her coffee every morning when he was home, the man who whispered jokes in church just to make her laugh. They had met by pure chance at a small coffee shop in Vermont. She was an accountant, living a quiet life filled with numbers and neat plans. He was visiting a buddy recovering from surgery. Somehow, their worlds crashed into each other, and neither one ever looked back. When they married, Nathan knew he would spend more time away than at home. One evening, a few months into their marriage, he had taken her to a shooting range. "If I'm going to be gone," he said, adjusting her stance with gentle hands, "I want to know you can protect yourself." At first, it was just about safety. Then it became something more. Their weekends together often ended with an hour at the range, Nathan teaching her everything he knew, how to breathe, how to stay steady, how to trust herself. She wasn't just good. She was better than good. Nathan told her once, smiling proudly, that she had hands steadier than half the rookies he had trained. The memories rushed in like a wave, the long talks after practice, the quiet pride in his eyes when she nailed a shot, the simple way he made her feel like she could do anything. Then came the worst day. A knock on the door, a folded flag pressed into her chest, words like classified mission and helicopter crash that didn't explain the hole ripped through her heart. Nathan was gone. Just like that. Emma hadn't picked up a gun since the funeral. She packed everything away, the guns, the medals, even Nathan's old training notes. She tried to live a new life, far away from anything that reminded her of what she had lost. But standing here now, in a place where she was laughed at and underestimated, Emma felt something deep inside her stir. Not anger, not fear. Something stronger. A promise she had made to Nathan the last time they were together at the range. "Keep practicing, even if I'm not there to remind you." Emma stepped up to the line. The noise of the room faded until all she could hear was her own breathing. She set her feet shoulder-width apart, feeling the ground under her shoes, just like Nathan had taught her. Her hands were steady as she raised the Glock, her arms locking into place with quiet confidence. She didn't rush. She didn't look around to see the crowd watching, waiting for her to fail. Instead, she focused only on the target, a small circle 50 yards away. Breathe in, hold, Breathe out halfway, squeeze, don't yank, Nathan's voice whispered in her mind. Emma took a slow breath. Her heart beat once, hard and sure. She let out half of it, steadying her aim, feeling the weight of the gun settle naturally into her grip. Then she squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, loud and sharp, cutting through the thick air of the club. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The mechanical whir of the target carrier sounded almost too loud as it pulled the paper back toward them. When it stopped, the truth was impossible to miss. Dead center. Perfect bullseye. The crowd fell into stunned silence. You could have heard a pin drop. A few mouths hung open. Even the receptionist who had brushed Emma off earlier was frozen behind her desk. Blake's smirk twitched, struggling to stay on his face. His eyes flicked to the target, then back to Emma, as if trying to understand what he had just seen. Emma lowered the Glock gently onto the table. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply stood there, calm and quiet, while the entire room struggled to believe what had just happened. Blake's hands clenched at his sides, but he forced a laugh, trying to shake off the moment like it was just some weird fluke. He took a step closer, his voice louder now, sharper. "Beginner's luck," he called out, forcing a smile toward the crowd. "Anybody can get lucky once." The people around him chuckled, but it didn't sound real anymore. There was a tension in the room now, something heavy sitting in the air. Blake wasn't going to let it end there, not with him looking like a fool. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook, flipping it open with a showy flick of his hand. $50,000, he said, his voice booming across the range. 3 bullseyes, 75 yards, hit all 3 and the money's yours. Miss even once and you admit you got lucky and walk out of here for good. A low murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't just a joke anymore. This was serious. Emma's fingers brushed over her ring again, feeling the small dent in the band where Nathan had once pressed it into her hand before leaving for deployment. She knew what she had to do. "If I win," she said, speaking up for the first time, "the money goes to the Veteran Support Foundation." There was a pause. Even Blake blinked, thrown off by the answer. He nodded, smirking again. "Fine. Makes no difference. You won't win." Before Emma could step back into place, Rebecca Johnson, the club manager, hurried over. Her voice was low, careful. "Miss Miller," she said, her eyes full of real concern. "You don't have to do this. Blake doesn't take losing well. He's powerful." Emma met her gaze without blinking. There was no fear in her eyes, only a steady calm that seemed to grow stronger by the second. "I'm not doing this for him," Emma said quietly. "I'm doing it for someone who never got the chance to come home." Rebecca hesitated, then stepped aside, giving a small nod. The crowd pushed closer. Phones were coming out now, people ready to film whatever happened next. Most of them still thought they were about to watch a woman crash and burn. They were wrong. Emma didn't waste a second. The next morning, while the city still slept, she packed up her old Glock and drove an hour out of town to a dusty public range where nobody knew her name. She didn't need fancy equipment or a crowd to impress. She needed focus. She needed to keep a promise. She set up alone, the cold air biting at her hands. Shot after shot, she worked through everything Nathan had taught her. Breathing, trigger control, finding the rhythm between her heartbeats. There was no music, no cheering, no bright lights, just the steady crack of bullets and the soft clink of empty casings hitting the concrete. By midday, an old pickup truck pulled into the lot. Michael Reeves climbed out, one of Nathan's old teammates, a man built like a brick wall but with eyes that had seen too much. Without a word, He grabbed a set of ear protection and walked to the next lane. "I heard you needed a sparring partner," he said simply. For hours, Michael tested her. Different distances, different guns, rapid changes she had to adjust to on the fly. When she faltered, he didn't yell. He didn't brag. He just reminded her of what she already knew. Trust her training. Trust herself. Meanwhile, back at the Elite Shooters Club, Blake wasn't wasting time either. He met quietly with the club's technician, a man who owed him more than a few favors. Blake leaned in close, his voice low and cold. "I don't need her to fail completely," he said. "Just tilt the odds back where they belong." The technician nodded. Small changes, adjusting trigger weights, tweaking scopes just enough to throw off anyone who didn't know the quirks. Blake left the meeting smiling for the first time in days. In his mind, the ending was already written. But out there in the cold, steady hands were writing a very different story. The Elite Shooters Club had never been this packed. Cars lined the streets, cameras flashed from behind velvet ropes, and a buzz of excitement ran through the crowd. Inside, the air was thick with perfume, cologne, and the sharp smell of gun oil. The big names of the city filled the front rows. Business owners, retired athletes, even a few politicians, all there to watch Blake Radcliffe remind everyone who ruled this place. At least, that's what Blake believed. He strolled across the competition floor wearing a brand new shooting jacket, sponsors' logos stitched along the sleeves. His smile was easy, practiced. To him, this wasn't a competition. It was a show, and he was the star. Emma walked in quietly, dressed in a simple navy shirt and jeans. She carried nothing but a small duffel bag. No crowd, no fanfare. Just a calm, steady look in her eyes that some of the veterans in the audience noticed right away. The rules were simple. 10 stations, 10 different firearms, targets at all distances. Whoever scored the most points would win. But what Emma noticed, what a casual shooter might miss, was the small, tricky changes at each station. A stiff trigger here. A sight that was just a little off there. Nothing you could prove, but enough to shake someone who wasn't ready. The first few stations showed the difference between them. Blake was flashy, drawing his gun with a spin, firing with dramatic pauses like he was performing for the cameras. His shots were good. No one could deny that. Emma, on the other hand, moved like a shadow. No wasted motion. No drama. She checked each weapon carefully, adjusted without complaint, and let her shots do the talking. Bullseye. Center mass. Tight groupings. Again and again. By the halfway point, Blake was ahead by a few points. His crowd cheered louder. His smile grew wider. But those watching closely, the ones who knew real skill, started to shift in their seats. Emma was closing the gap, one shot at a time. At Station 7, a poorly balanced pistol tried to throw her off. Emma noticed instantly, adjusted her grip, and matched Blake's score anyway. At Station 8, a loose sight should have made her miss. She didn't. By the end of the 9th station, the scoreboard flashed something no one had expected. Tied. Blake's jaw tightened. Emma just calmly wiped her hands on a small cloth and stepped toward the final line. It all came down to one last shot. The last station stood at the far end of the range. A long table, a high-powered rifle, and a target barely visible in the distance. This was Blake's territory, a custom Macmillan rifle, one he had trained with for years. Emma had never touched this exact model before. She didn't need to. She stepped up to the table and sat down behind the rifle. Instantly, she felt the problem. The scope was off, just enough to throw her off target. The adjustments were subtle but deliberate. Blake had made sure of that. She didn't panic. She didn't call it out. She just closed her eyes for a moment and let her breath settle. In her mind, Nathan's voice came back. When the pressure hits, trust your training. If the gear fails, adjust. You already know what to do. Emma opened her eyes and made a few careful turns on the scope. Nothing rushed, nothing dramatic. She checked the wind, adjusted her body, and held the rifle like it was something familiar, like it was hers. The crowd leaned in. Phones were recording. Blake stood with his arms crossed, trying to look bored, but his jaw was tight. Emma pulled in one deep breath. Let half of it go. Then fired. The shot echoed like a drumbeat through the quiet range. The air hung still. Even Blake's friends had gone silent. The target rolled back slowly. Click, click, click. When it stopped in front of the judges, there was no doubt. Bullseye, dead center. The room exploded. People stood up. Applause filled the space like thunder. Some cheered, others simply stared, still trying to believe what they had just seen. Emma stayed seated for a second, breathing steady, her eyes locked on the paper target. She didn't smile. Not yet. Across the floor, Blake looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. His arms dropped to his sides. The cameras, once pointed at him, were all on Emma now. She had done it. In front of everyone. With the odds stacked against her. She didn't just win, she proved she belonged. By the next morning, news of the competition had spread everywhere. The video of Emma's final shot was already being shared across social media, with headlines calling her the mystery marksman and the woman who beat the unbeatable. But the story didn't stop at the range. Security footage showed Blake's team tampering with the equipment. Within hours, club officials launched an investigation. Sponsors backed away. His titles were called into question. Blake, who once stood at the top, now found himself answering questions he couldn't dodge. Emma didn't say much. She never did. She turned down interviews, ignored the sudden flood of attention, and quietly visited the Veterans Foundation office the following week. They offered her a position. Not for show, not to ride the wave of her win, but to help train veterans dealing with pain, loss, and silence of their own. Shooting, they said, could be healing. Emma understood that better than most. She agreed. A few months later, she stood in front of her first small class, 6 veterans, some with visible scars, some without. She didn't start with a speech, just a soft voice and steady hands. "My name is Emma," she said. "I'm not a soldier. I'm not a champion. I'm just someone who kept a promise." And as the sun warmed the range behind her, she glanced down at the gold ring on her finger, twisting it once. Sometimes the strongest voices don't yell. Sometimes the most powerful people are the ones no one saw coming. Never underestimate the quiet ones.